to Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
How are you? What's up? How you doing?
Oh, man, it's the end of the year. And so what better time for me to go to a rally for Palestine and have some ice fall from the sky and give me a concussion?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. You know how it is.
Are you okay? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling lucky. I'm feeling lucky because it hit me of all people in the crowd of several hundreds of people. So that's almost winning the lottery of a sort. And my glasses protected my head really well because they smashed as a result of the force. But I also feel lucky because I was wearing my sunglasses, even though it was super cloudy, but I thought it was just a little too bright to wear my regular glasses. And so my actual regular glasses are fine. So all things considered, I'm moving a bit slower today. My head hurts, and podcasting is kind of perfect for a concussion because I'm just sitting here with my eyes closed thinking about the wonderful conversation we're going to have today.
Well, that deserves a holiday. A concussion
hell yes.
deserves a holiday. I'm sorry that happened.
That's okay. How are you?
I'm doing great. I submitted the first draft of the manuscript of my book this morning. And
oh, my God.
I am feeling really, really, really great about that because I submitted it with good references. And if you know what it's like to go through references for a really large piece of writing and double check them and make sure that everything's good, you know hell. And so that little last bit of it really sucked. And I'm really happy for it to be off to somebody else's eyes. So I'm very happy about that.
Yes, that's awesome. That is one of the best moments of book writing. So congratulations. And, this is our last episode of 2023.
Last episode. Thanks for being on the ride with us, y'all. You folks have been such an amazing audience. Nora, we're number 3.
I know. It's okay, so folks, there are something called podcast charts. I mean, I'm always looking at them and being oh, okay. And in the politics podcasting chart, Sandy and Nora is the 3rd most listened to podcast in politics that's Canadian in the Canadian podcast charts.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, look, Canadians listen to American podcasts too. So if you really care, we're number 10, which is still amazing, when you get put in the American news, but we're number 3 in Canada, and that's thanks to all of you. And it's been such a great year, being able to come and see a bunch of you in your local places. We've had a lot of fun doing that, and we just really appreciate all of you for tuning in every week, for listening, for engaging with us. We love it. So thanks for being around this year.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. We'll be back obviously in January. Not sure when. We're going to take a couple weeks off and decide when we are ready to come back. Though the Daily News will continue. You'll hear on the Daily News what that schedule is going to be like. I suspect the Daily News will be back before Sandy and Nora, but you never know. There's a lot of news, so maybe we'll be encouraged to get back. I don't know. One of the things that we are hoping in the new year is that we can hire someone to help us with the Daily News. So that whole experiment, now coming to 1 year of fruition, is pretty much 100% volunteer by me. And I need some help because it's a ton of work, especially when I'm on the road. So that requires a bit of extra money. If in 2024 you find yourself with a little bit of extra money and you want to donate it to Sandy and Nora, we're going to make sure it goes right to hiring someone who can help write scripts for 2 days a week. So not tons and tons and tons of work, but we want to make sure that they're well paid. So think about that. If that's in your budget, if that's something you can do, hey, it's the holidays. You can gift somebody who might love Sandy and Nora, give them a little $5 per month donation and say it's come into the show. And we would appreciate that. And we'll put it to really good use.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think that, as we take a look at the Canadian media landscape, all of the job losses over the year, over the years, but like certainly over this year, and the dearth in reporting, like what's missing. We're really acutely aware of the role that we fill, both as like analysis, and increasingly as news, as we have these 10-minute markers for you. And we'd love to hear from you if there's any other ideas that you have for how Sandy and Nora can be helpful to you. Let us know. We'll consider it, and we'll see if that's something that we can manage in the new year. We do really think that what we're doing here is necessary. It itself was a bit of an experiment, and I think it's going well. I think it's a net positive. So thanks again for all of you, and if you feel like you could help us out in that way, we would love to be able to hire someone to help write that news. And we love you anyway and have gratitude for you anyway. So we've got some people to thank this week.
Yes, that's right. We do. So thank you so much to everyone who's donated at patreon.com, especially to Sarah, Yolanda, Jeffrey, Roy, Kristen, Stephanie, Sam, Jelena, Jennifer, Natalie, Asim, Kylie, Linnea, Ebony, Moremi, Allison, Victoria, Dominic, Sam, meet a lowly abject turd. Oh, I'm sure you're not that lowly, Mr. Turd. And Colin, Handy, and Nagib. Thank you so much, everybody. And Sandy, you know what? I just want to make a fine point. Okay, so we're number 3. Did you see who's number 2 and number 1?
Oh my God, no! Nor you look at the charts. I just do this thing and enjoy it.
Yes. Number 2 is Paul Wells, who's a longtime writer at Maclean's. And number 1 is Peter Mansbridge. And it is so interesting to me that there's such a generational divide. There's such a kind of media divide, certainly political analysis and political perspective. Those are both conservative men, but they're also both men who've had full careers, fully funded mainstream careers in Canadian journalism. And then here we are just nipping at their heels.
Oh, that just means we're number 1. That just means we're number 1.
I like the reveal.
You should have told me that before. We're not number 3 by any stretch of the imagination. Those are number 2 and number 1. No. We're number 1 among the audience that we care about. So wow, I feel even better.
I don't doubt that we can unseat Mr. Mansbridge.
Oh, come on. We absolutely must be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So it's the end of the year, Sandy. And what a year. What a year. What a year.
Oh my God. What a year. What a year. I mean, it's like, it's really difficult almost to do a retrospective of the year because, you know, the last chunk of it has just felt so all encompassing by war and the realization of like, who runs this place and what their thoughts are on genocide. I mean, like, yeah, we've all had like the realization of who runs this place a million times before and like who they are, but it's a different kind of knowing now, I feel like. And also it's hard because it just feels like, you know, there's been one overarching story of this year, like when people remember 2023, the slaughter in Gaza is going to be what is remembered of this year, 20 years from now. And I mean, of course it should be. But I mean, even the news coming out this week has been, I mean, it just continues to get more and more like unbelievable from 20% of the soldiers of the IDF, their killings being from a friendly fire, to hostages, Israeli hostages being killed by the IDF on site. 3 of them who were waving white flags
and speaking Hebrew at them.
The death toll, and speaking Hebrew, asking for help. To the death toll again being there's now a new count that of the Israeli death toll on October 7th. And it just seems stunning that it has gone from 1,400 deaths to now by this new count to below 700. I continue to be just, stunned by the news that's coming out. They say fog of war, but of course, you don't really know what that's going to mean. And each week, the news is more and more horrifying. And the scale of the carnage and the slaughter is more and more horrifying. Mm-hmm. So 2023, what an awful, awful year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. It's really hard to think of anything that came before October 7th because this seems to have taken up, a ton of political tension as it should. It's reignited activist movements in a way that we have not seen in decades in Canada, as it should have. And so thinking about before then, I'm like, oh my God, what else happened this year? And of course, there's been a lot of amazing things that have happened this year, like the tenant organizing and tenant union organizing. Shout out to the folks at the York Southwestern Tenants Union who've just had a victory after a 74-hour occupation of their landlord's offices to have a woman given the keys back to her apartment over something like $500 late payment or non-payment of rent for 1 month, like just completely ridiculous and horrible. But that really has been the story of 2023, is that the affordability crisis has taken center stage. Inflation has started to kind of let up. And we're seeing what was left in its wake, people being forced to repay mortgages at rates that they can't afford, the skyrocketing use of food banks in every corner of this country, the homelessness crisis and encampments. We know we're recording on Monday. This morning, Edmonton police had planned to clear out 8 encampments across the city of Edmonton right before Christmas, like sending people out of the only shelter that they have and confiscating their materials, their personal belongings. The grocery barons making more money, the telecoms making more money, the oil companies all making more money, a summer of wildfires, a summer of chaotic weather. I mean, Christ, right now I've got 50, I should say centimeters because there should be snow, but 50 millimeters of rain falling in Quebec City and it should be snow. Like, it has been a catastrophic year. And so, of course, ending a catastrophic year with a catastrophic war, I guess, makes some sort of poetic sense. But it has been horrifying to see the callousness of people in power over everything, and how the most radical thing that we've got in Ottawa is saying we should call for a ceasefire, which is just like the most basic thing that should be called for. That should be something everybody should be able to agree on, like cease the fire, stop firing on people. This is basic. So yeah, it's been a pretty bad year. I mean, on the positive, other than the really great organizing work that's been going on.
Before we get to the positive, I just want to add a few things to that list.
I was going to throw back to you to get negative, because I was just going to say we are further away from COVID than we were in 2020, even though it's not gone away and it's still around and is still making people sick. We are back to some sort of apocalyptic normal. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I do want to say that's positive from that is that small move to a ceasefire is not to Canada calling for a ceasefire and, the world putting pressure on Israel to move to a ceasefire. That comes from the pressure of organizing, and it comes from the reignition of the organizing in Canada. I mean, had it not been for the relentlessness of the organizers, for the refusal to give up, even when being targeted by employers, by educators and institutions, by the government, for Christ's sake, calling out some of these people directly in legislatures, and even MPs like Anthony Housefather trying to recreate what's happened in the United States, calling on colleges and universities to to essentially try to stamp out any speech that is supporting Palestinians or be hauled into a hearing. It's absolutely ridiculous. The refusal from folks to bow to power, demanding that, or saying that there will be McCarthyist consequences to your voices, saying a ceasefire now, or stop the genocide, or stop the siege. That is what has pushed our government to take this step, which means, of course, again, the government can be pushed, and it can be pushed to do more. Other things that happened this year, like I think a big theme of this year too, is the continuing to cede away power to corporations. What we have done collectively as a country in and just like the world in giving more and more power to the tech giants, and seeing what that has wrought on us, like for everything from what is going on Twitter to how the tech giants could control in a way the access that we have to certain types of news in this country, and to kind of throw around our politicians and make demands of them and not the other way around, to the big sort of AI revolution and everything that's going on in terms of predictive algorithms and how that is going to change our world. It's like that has been another really major news story of the year that, quite frankly, at this point, we just do not have a handle on. And it's going to take some deep politics to try to figure out, like, folks, should we not all own this stuff? Shouldn't we own a version of this stuff as people with a motive that is deeper than just profit? And if the answer to that question is yes, and if we should be able to own the regulation of it, then we have a lot of hard work to do.
Oh my God. I mean, a lot of hard work is maybe an understatement. Like, we're nowhere, and our institutions on the left are absolutely nowhere in talking about this stuff. Like, sure, unions are negotiating around AI, and that is one way for people to push back against this kind of using AI to attack all of us and to steal our information and to replace us. You can do that through negotiations, of course. But God, like 2023 was a year where we had no left-wing opposition in Ottawa. And I think it's really important to state that plainly. The NDP is still riding this ridiculous agreement that they have with the Liberals, where they are not actually able to be an opposition, because at the end of the day, they are propping up the Liberals. That means they wear the decisions of the Liberals, and it's all been in the service of, don't worry, we're going to get pharmacare, we're going to get dental care. And sure, the dental care plan has been announced. I'm still totally skeptical that it's going to actually deliver what people are promising it's going to deliver. We'll have to see the details. I've been trying to carve out like 5 minutes to read the details of this program. But you know what? Even if it was total and free and full dental care, that does not actually equal giving up the role of opposition. And if you think about everything from the affordability crisis and the food crisis and housing and blah, 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 to have not actually had an effective opposition in Ottawa, that's a huge deficit that we've had to endure for the whole year.
Yeah. Yeah. And, at some point, I think, the sort of energy that the left has right now, we should be thinking really deeply about what that means, where we put that energy into having some sort of voice in Ottawa. Like, what would it mean to have that? Because we see the importance of it. Obviously, there's limits to the type of things that you can achieve in big P politics. But I think that there is a necessity in having people who aren't going to be afraid to say, in the face of a genocide, in the face of a long-standing global issue, that there is it's pretty clear where you should land. We need a voice like that that's going to be there to push not only the political sphere in the right direction, but also that the political sphere has an impact on culture and what is allowed to be discussed in our national media and on the news, in analysis, and we need people who are not going to be afraid to push those buttons. And I think it's high time we figure out what that means. And so maybe that's something that we take into the new year, because again, the consequences can be very, very grave, as we've seen this year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and culture is not just the creation of culture, what's allowed to be said, what's not allowed to be said, and who's sticking their neck out, who's getting fired as a result. And we know that that's all happened. But it's also about constricting our lives to such extreme extents that we'd have no time to create culture. The way that we understand these crises is so rarely talked about from the perspective of intentionally stopping us from having time to breathe and create and think and do creative things and to resist. And so, a couple weeks ago, I was on a picket line talking to someone who works in my kid's school. And I was saying, so how's the strike been? And this person is not a teacher. They've only been on strike with the Front Commun. So they were on strike for days instead of weeks. And they were like, you know what? It's great. I get to write poetry again. Right. And I was thinking of my partner who, when he was on strike for 5 weeks last April, he went right to writing music again because he wasn't allowed to touch anything. And, as professors, that's really, really hard. So we had to do something because otherwise he would have just done his work and he wasn't supposed to. And, that kind of space to be able to create, it isn't just good for individuals. I mean, it is good for individuals, but it's actually what creates the sense of community, of belonging, and of culture and of identity that Canada does not have. There is a need, if this country is going to continue, to have some sort of national uniting culture. And when you destroy people's ability to make culture, whether through making rents too high or studios impossible to afford, or granting councils that just don't give enough money to enough people and make really bad decisions based on very silly criteria, you get no culture. You get no culture. And so then all of a sudden it's well, what in the hell holds this country together? What exactly is it that makes someone living in British Columbia the same person as someone living in Regina? And, as someone that actually doesn't think that Canada should be held together, I do think, though, that culture is important in imagining a new Canada. So, I still think we need culture. But from the perspective of someone who's a patriotic Canadian, this is self-immolation. It's self-immolation, and the only thing that it's leaving behind are pieces for the far right to pick up. I had a friend who was in Toronto last week for a conference. My friend is American and lives not in English Canada, and she was saying to me, the touchy-feely, fake bullshit that was just so present at this conference was so English Canadian. She's like, if this was in Quebec, people would have actually debated. There would have been passionate interventions. There would have been arguments. But it was so passive that she said that if this is how Canadian institutions right now operate, institutions being anything from universities to the healthcare system and healthcare institutions to the educational system and educational institutions, then of course Pierre Poilievre is going to have a fucking walk in the park, because there's no combativeness, there's no passion, there's no anybody saying, hold on, this is a disaster. And instead, what is worse is saying that kind of feverish reaction to what's going on right now is what serves Pierre Poilievre. And so instead, we all have to actually be very calm. We have to stand behind the Liberals. We have to not be crazy. Don't go and disrupt Santa and make children cry because there's no connection between Santa and Bethlehem, which is in the occupied territories. It's being bombed by Israel. It's really nuts. It's chaotically nuts. And the impact is so devastating on our collective sense of who we are and our collective ability to do anything, that the only thing that benefits from this level of chaos and disorganization is the far right, which is then why we're like, oh my God, we can't do anything to stop the far right. I can't believe it. It's very, very bad.
Yeah, it's very, very bad. But this space to create, this like figuring out time and space to create, is someone who like works from home by myself for in a choice that at the time didn't know if it was the right choice to do something like that. And like, who knows, like I might not be able to do this forever, like that's not something that I'm, 100% confident of. But whenever you have the ability to create that space for yourself to create and to figure out what it is that you are and what you want to do, that is one, a political act. It's a political thing to be able to say, no, I'm gonna try to figure out how I can live for myself in some ways. And like whether that means leisure or creating something that is deeply political, like this podcast, it is something that is good for you personally, for your soul, for your mental health, and for a community that is in desperate need of culture. Like, how could it be that so many of us, our lives are just dedicated to making other people wealthy, that our lives are dedicated to just like being as as like easygoing and non-confrontational and non-risk taking as possible. Well, that's the life that someone else or a whole bunch of someone else's have imagined for the majority of us. And that's not good enough. And we've talked before about how that is the essence of Canadian culture, is like this fear or like taking the easiest path forward or something, which may have something to do with being like the golden child of the monarchy. Or something. And like, if anyone's written about that, let me know, because I want to read that book. But I fucking refuse. I don't want that. I don't want anything to do with that. And any way that we can push back on that thing is really, really good for all of us.
No, it really is. And making those kinds of connections, like understanding that there is a connection between the state overloading us all with everything and the state aligning with a genocidal project right now conducted by the state of Israel. If we're too busy to protest, if we have too much to lose, if we're too afraid of losing our jobs, then we're not going to use the platforms that we have to speak out. And at the same time, I think that one of the things that has surprised me in 2023, and I don't use that word really with the full force of what it means, but I have noted it, I guess, is like just how much more brazen police have been with their brutality. And there's not really anywhere with a good list of like police murders that happen in this country. There's a Wikipedia that hasn't been updated in very long. And I know there's groups like Winnipeg Police Cause Harm that keep track certainly of statistics that are for Winnipeg Police. But it is my sense that there have been more people killed by police in 2023 than we would have seen in 2019. For example, maybe Sandy, you've got a better idea than that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. And, when I was doing a look around to see how many people had been killed just in the last 2 weeks in Canada by police, I found 3 people, 2 in Edmonton and 1 in a rural community in Saskatchewan. And it's like, what is going on there?
Yeah, no one does seem to be counting that in this country, which is really... It's a really big hole that certainly like I wish we had the type of organization that would be able to fill it, and I'm hoping that maybe someone steps up to the plate, but we don't have that anyone doing that work right now, but it is the case that like fucking worldwide, cops are becoming more brazen. It's not just in Canada. And you know, we've talked about before how police are like related to one another, like around the world, you know, from the IDF, you know, will do some training with cops in the United States, cops in Canada on campuses, on different campuses around the world, to the RCMP doing training in Ukraine and in places all over the world. It's like really intense how well organized they are internationally in a way that you probably don't think about. And so when you start to see things like the cops carrying assault rifles on the streets of Toronto, and that weird video that went viral last week, I don't know if you've seen it, of like cops running down the street in downtown Toronto trying to catch a speeding car with these massive rifles. And then obviously that's not a way to catch a speeding car, and getting really tired and like running back to their vehicles with their massive rifles. It's just like when you see this really bizarre shit, it's like, you know, do the police in Toronto need assault rifles? No, they don't, but their friends are getting them elsewhere, so they demand it too. And it's the reason why you see like the sort of military vehicles in smaller communities than you would imagine that you would have anything like that for the police, because they're getting them elsewhere. And it's like, you know, really bizarre being in a place like LA where there's like helicopters everywhere, and then you like turn around while getting a coffee and there's like a police ATV Rover thing rolling down the street, like next to a Prius, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? Why would anybody need this? The cops are getting more bold everywhere, and part of it is because of this sort of backlash that has happened to the movement in 2020, and people being really, really critical of police. At the same time, some of the things that people have demanded coming out of 2020, most notably different services for emergency services for people who are dealing with mental health crises. That has been growing. That's been growing all over the world, and that is really incredible to see. So look, like the possibilities for shifting policing are first like fucking massive. Like we can absolutely win this, and in some ways we, again, as we've said before, we have, because people are more critical of the police than they ever have been, and it's up to us to continue that fight, to say like the police should not be anywhere near schools. The police should not be anywhere near people who are dealing with housing insecurity. They should not be anywhere near fucking anyone. We just, you know, we need to continue talking about these issues. And we need to be aware that in Canada, some of the most awful ways that the police operate is to hide everything that they are doing from us.
But it's funny you say that, because even when they don't hide it from us, the journalists that cover police sometimes still just buy the police line. I'm not sure if you saw last week a video from the Palestinian youth movement in Toronto posted an image of a guy, or a video of a guy who police kneeled on his neck. And
yes, I did.
It's clear. I mean, like, the only way that they didn't kneel on the guy's neck is if this guy somehow didn't have a neck, and that his head and his body just had no neck. That would be the only way that the police could say they did not kneel on this person's neck, because you can see it very clearly. And still, CBC News carries the headline, video appears to show. It's like, no, it definitely shows. You don't have to couch that. It definitely shows that. Police say it didn't happen. Police say it didn't happen. I'm sorry. I'm okay. So it did.
That's the headline?
Yeah.
That's a choice, CBC. It is a choice.
It's a choice to also have that article be unbylined so that we can't follow up with the journalist and be like, hey, what the fuck? So we can't.
Oh man, Nora, in my book, this isn't something I mentioned, but a lot of the sources have to do with like stuff that's been reported.
Right.
And there's a lot that's reported about police that do not have bylines.
Yeah. I noticed that in the COVID book that I wrote too. CBC News is especially bad at this. The Canadian press is bad too, and certainly with the Daily News podcast, I'm seeing that as a pattern that there is consistently, especially in Toronto. I have to say that it feels like Edmonton has really good local journalism, and it doesn't matter where people are at, if they're at CTV or the Edmonton Journal or CBC. But in Toronto, especially, CBC's like, we're not gonna name the person that wrote this shit, and it's like, what was that decision? So here you have this article of a guy of the police saying that didn't happen. You can literally watch the video, and CBC pulled out stills where it's very, very clear that it did happen. And then the article is all about whether or not it did or didn't happen, and not about the fact that anybody at a Palestinian solidarity movement would be so threatening to police that he's getting his neck stepped on in this illegal and dangerous maneuver. Like, we cannot count on mainstream journalists to hold anybody to account. We've got a national columnist industry that is like disappointed that Canada called for a ceasefire. Like, please put your bloodthirstiness away, Andrew Coyne, being all like, oh, no one represents me anymore, that we're calling for the violence to stop. Like, are you kidding me? Just this like total fidelity to Israel, and they can do no wrong even when they're killing their own fucking citizens as hostages. That story, especially for me, coming out shows that Israel is probably doing way worse than what we're seeing, and that they were forced to admit that because there's more information that could probably come out, that might come out, who knows. That's a crisis communications decision, because of course what we see is like a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. That's the case all the time in every single war. And at the same time, the death toll of journalists has risen to 90 in Gaza. 90. That would be the equivalent.
That is astronomical. Oh my God.
Yeah, that is the equivalent of more than 1,600 Canadian journalists being killed since October 7th. Okay. And, I saw someone today say, remember Charlie Hebdo? This seems like kind of astronomically bigger than Charlie Hebdo. And somehow it was the Canadian media establishment's like unified line to be in solidarity with the journalists of Charlie Hebdo. Obviously in France, when 8 of them, I think, were killed in 2015. The silence about Gaza, the silence about Palestine is disgusting. And Canadian journalism will never recover from this. And what's worse is there are average Canadians seeing this saying, this doesn't make any sense. Where is this complete loyalty to the IDF coming from within Canadian media?
Yeah, and the thing about that story of someone being beaten and having their necks kneeled on in the protest in Toronto, like that story isn't like whether it happened or not. Like what? Like the story there is about the repression of Canadian voices who've been very, very, very loud and very, very organized across the country in saying, joining together, demanding a ceasefire, an end to genocide, and an end to the siege. And that story, CBC News, is missing, because that story, if you are concentrating on that story, you get to talk about all of the different ways that is happening to people across the country. You get to talk about why the police are being deployed in this way across the country. And you get to talk about the police who themselves have been saying over and over, hey guys, we're having an increased presence just to make sure everybody's safe during this wartime. Like, what the fuck is that? Like, I want a story about that. Like, the police have been saying that for some time. What is that doing to police budgets? What does that mean for overtime? What does that mean for like a force that we know, like these people get, they expect to have some sort of confrontation when they're saying something like that, and they get fucking bored and they look for it. Like you can see it in that fucking video. There's one person, and how many cops are there? Plus the cops who immediately get ready to shield, using their bodies to shield what's happening from the cameras. Like, that is a story that these cops are being used in this way when people are literally saying, we want peace. Like, that is a massive story. And instead to say, protest video appears to show this, cops say no. Like, what? I mean, that one of these things is journalism and the other is like, what, like, who cares? Like, why would that be something that would be a headline?
Yeah. Okay, well, here we are. It's the end of 2023. We're looking forward to 2024. I don't imagine either of us think that things are going to get better, certainly not on their own. And it's anyone's guess how organizing is going to shift and change. What is clear, I want to shout out the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. It's their 5th anniversary, and that is an umbrella organization of groups that fight for justice for migrant workers. Their creation 5 years ago has led to an incredible amount of attention and solidarity and support for migrant workers. And that's a really good model that demonstrates what you can do in this country with its federated structure and many, many different moving parts. So happy birthday to them, and check them out if you're not aware of their work. But Sandy, let's maybe close this out with some predictions for 2024. Are you feeling bold?
I always feel bold.
Okay, well, while you think of a prediction that you want to ask me, I'm going to ask you first. Prediction, what goes on in Ottawa? What happens with Justin Trudeau in 2024? There's no election planned, but could there be? What do you think?
Ooh, an election in 2024? It's possible, I suppose. Like, I do not think that the NDP, I mean, I don't know, who knows, but like, it would be really weird if they let it ride out until like the natural election point. But I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, there needs to be a plan to do better, because at this point, if there is going to be an election, it's going to be really simple for Pierre. So there needs to be some organizing on the left if that is to be useful in some way. And so the answer, I'm gonna say yes.
Oh,
because I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very bold.
It is bold. I think yes, because I can't imagine a world where they just let the election ride out in 2025. And so that means that it needs to be called beforehand. I think it'll be late. I think it'll be over something ridiculous. And I think that there will be some sort of attempt, maybe like a national tour or something like that, both from the Liberals and the NDP, to sort of rehabilitate their leaders' images. Like, I don't really think that Justin Trudeau is going to run again, even though he said that he is. But, you know, the Liberals will have to do something to rehabilitate their image. And like, more importantly, it means that for us, like, given that timeline, for us on the left, we have some really important work to do and a really important opportunity this year. And whether or not that means having the type of influence that we would want to have on the election this year, or gearing up to have the type of election we would want, influence we would want to have on an election in years to come, either of those things are important. And I hope that there's a way that we can build that's the more important thing. But yeah, I think I'm going to say yes.
I think that that's probably a fair prediction. I don't know if it's triggered, though, I don't think it's triggered by the NDP. I don't think that they have any capacity to do anything, and they prefer to never be in an election ever again if they can avoid it. I do think, though, that the Liberals are opportunists, and they will call a snap election if they think that there's a crisis that is stopping Poilievre from getting government. I don't know what that crisis might be. It could be anything. It's hard to know, because Poilievre has so far kind of avoided a lot of scandals and criticism, which is a little bit surprising. But I do think that 2025 seems a bit far away. The only thing that might stop all of that, though, is if the Liberals find themselves in a leadership race, which they very, very well may, and I think that that is more likely than an election in 2024. And so if that's the case, it'll be like, I don't know, a hell show of Mark Carney versus Chrystia Freeland versus Melanie Jolie versus Mark Miller. And that the Liberals might use to try and change the channel on everything, because I think that the credibility of the Liberals has plummeted with their reaction to Israel. And they know that, but it's not clear that the Conservatives are going to benefit from that, because the Conservatives have been even worse. So that's a very, very interesting political thing that I'm going to be watching for.
What do you think the biggest news in Canadian media is going to be next year? Do you think that we continue to see astronomical job losses, or do you think that there is some sort of turning tide in 2024, something different that happens that leads to some sort of shift?
I don't think that there's anything that's going to be positive. Anything that's positive is going to take years to build, and we're already in the middle of those kinds of experiments right now. I think that Canadaland shows the limits of the rich guy financed, user financed media model. That the second that someone becomes kind of too big for their own media corporation or empire or cooperative or collective or anything, that they become a liability if they fall out with the listeners. And so I'll be watching what happens to Canadaland, because I think that that's going to be an indication for where independent media might be able to go in this country as the most successful independent media around that isn't like of the far right. But on the mainstream world, I think we're going to continue to see post media to slide into full blown propaganda mode. And we're going to see more job losses. And the real question for me as someone from Southwestern Ontario is, what will be the fallout of the Metroland media stuff? Who is covering city and town council meetings? What kind of corruption are we never going to hear about because of that? And another year of watching our institutions within the media world not really be able to deal with any of that stuff, not be able to throw out innovative and new projects and trying to fix anything at all.
Wow. Yeah. That's bleak, Nora. What do you hope for 2024 as a final sort of question?
Oh my God. I think that this organizing that we're seeing around Palestine, there's two possibilities that happen to it. One is that it fizzles and nothing happens, especially if some sort of global campaign stops Israel's attack on Gaza, the energy will be kind of removed to turn that level of mobilization into something. So I'm really, really hopeful that that's not what happens, that instead the organizing that has come together to support Palestine morphs into something that's more permanent. And not that that permanent structure has to be like super, super formal, but a lot of organizing that came out of the anti-war and anti-globalization movements in the late 1990s and the early 2000s paved the way for new kinds of organizing after in the 2000s, which was then crushed by various things. I think that our only hope is a lot of that organizing, and especially when it comes to campus, the people who are learning how to talk to people and organize rallies and flyer and do things last minute and deal with cops. Those are the people that have the skills to build other things as well, or to build a real solidarity movement with Palestine to go on beyond whatever happens in the next couple of months. So I think that that's probably my biggest hope. I don't have much hope in popular movements being able to stop things yet, like the affordability crisis or whatever. But I do think that like the hopefulness around the tenant union organizing is really, really exciting. And if that continues to grow, then, the sky's the limit on what tenants are able to do to push back against bad landlords. What about you?
I think my biggest hope is that all of this organizing becomes more powerful. And I think that in one way that this type of organizing can become more powerful is if we do as much as we can to get that organizing off the internet and to start organizing more and more in person. And to do the sort of organizing that includes disagreement and conflict and different approaches. Like that stuff is good. It is good to have a whole bunch of different approaches and to figure out where you want your organizing identity to live, but to also understand that you are part of something that's much larger, that doesn't look like exactly the same in each place, and that also recognizes that we need everybody to be a part of it, and that we're going to struggle with one another through the contradictions that we have, because we must rely on each other, and there's nothing else, because there's nothing else. We only have one another. And I'm hoping that that is becoming more and more obvious as we're organizing for things that are more and more urgent, because, there's no time to waste on all of the crises that are kind of facing us. And so that is my hope, is for more power to be held within the people who are organizing on the ground, and for that power to really become infectious, because we're doing it in front of one another and understanding what it's like to organize within each other's like energies, and like our what it takes to have like a confrontation and argument with one another, and then struggle towards something where we can be moving forward together. It's like a beautiful thing to be able to do something like that. And I'm hoping that all of the intense organizing of this year leads us to more and more of that.
Totally. Well, I know you celebrate Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. This is going to be a really sad Christmas, frankly, knowing what's going on in Bethlehem and what's going on in Palestine and Gaza specifically. I hope that if you also celebrate Christmas, that you talk about the stuff with your family and your friends, and that we don't allow for this holiday to go past and not have conversations about our responsibility to resist what our government has supported, and what our government continues to support, everything from arms being exported to Israel to the moral support that comes from our government, despite the fact that they joined the ceasefire call. They're still fully in lockstep with Israel, my God. And I hope, Sandy, you get some time off and that it's restful.
You too. Happy New Year.
Yes, well, Happy New Year. And we'll talk to everybody in the new year.
Bye.